want to talk a bit about embracing change, and the first thing I want to do is say to you, I should have appeared here knowing you're a young audience. I should have actually appeared here in a pair of jeans and a t-shirt looking really cool, man. I want to steal this thing that Rob Siltanen gave to Steve Jobs when back in '98. And this is what Steve Jobs said in front of an audience, and it sums up everything that I feel, and I feel you should think every day about the market and what you do, and how you should think about people like me who've tried to innovate stuff and sometimes failed. And when I tell you about my project, my current project, to decide for yourself whether or not I have a chance or I have no chance, okay? So at the moment, we're on chance or no chance, and at the end, I'll ask you what you think. So here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules. They have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius, because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So I guess my message in there is, whatever it is that you decide to do, don't be frightened to be a little bit crazy. You know, it was mentioned earlier about persisting, doing things, persisting and having ideas and doing new creative things. Don't be frightened to be crazy in whatever you do. So that's the Apple logo that happened at the time when that speech was made. And this was what happened in the 1990s. I was back in those Cargill days when I was first trained, I left Cargill I did 3 or 4 years. It was called Cargill University. John Lothian will probably remember that. And then I went to work for a merchant bank, what you might call today an investment bank, now part of Dresdner Bank. In those days, Kleinwort Greaveson. And I also had one of those first laptops. I was fascinated by technology. I always embraced technology. And, I love change. And at the time, during the 90s, when we all first used these machines, Microsoft was the big game changer. It was the big player. Everybody was cool. And, I used Microsoft Word for DOS, disk operating system, before Windows. And then Windows 1 came along, and I quickly changed to that. And then Windows 2, and then we sort of saw Microsoft gradually through the 90s innovate its products and do it brilliantly. And all the time, Apple was a widdly little company over here, but talking this big changes, this big sort of revolutionary stuff that I talked to you about in the first slide. That was the comparison. Huge Windows, tiny Apple. And that, in actual fact, there was a time in the 90s when Apple were going to go fut, in my living memory. And this is where we are in 2015, and I think I've been kind to Microsoft, quite frankly. Because all the way through, when my brother in the early 2000s was saying, you should be with Apple, I was saying, no, it's a difficult operating system, I can't use it. I was actually sticking with Windows, but he was right. Today, what do we all do? They're going to start banking now with Apple Pay, aren't they, with all this stuff. So I wanted to say, in this idea of your careers, what you do, how you do it, don't be frightened to be a bit crazy and plough your own furrow. I am a farmer's son. I believe you should follow your own course. And I want to just give you, first of all, a couple of I am going to talk about the Swiss Futures and Options Association in a minute, but just give you some reflections of my time as a trader and then as a market maker. The first thing is, as a market maker, there are 2 kinds of positions you get as a trader. When you go into the office in the morning, there's the first kind of position, which is the one where you've thought to yourself, this is how I feel about the market, this is what the market's going to do, and this is the position, long or short, that I'm going to take as a result of my cognition, as a result of how I think. And those are always the trades that make you money. And then there's the second kind of trade, which is the one where you're a bit lazy, a bit hungover, you've been out for a big party the night before, and you kind of get the market made for you. Somebody comes on, they ask you for a price, you're a bit slack, and you kind of run your book, and at the end of the day, running your book, you find that you've got this book, and guess what? That's the book that loses you money. So the kind of, the sort of metaphor is that when you're planning your career, deciding what it is that you're going to do to be a little bit crazy, to be persistent, to do all these things that all these grey-haired old farts have told you to do, the most important thing is that you make your own book. You decide for yourself what it is that you're doing. So don't think today that being an investment banker might be a good thing for you to do because historically investment bankers have made a lot of money, because it may be something else different tomorrow. So that's why I think that blockchain and Bitcoin stuff, which kind of is very interesting. Now I just want to talk about the past, present and future of the Swiss Futures and Options Association. What is it? Well, the Swiss Futures and Options Association is an association which is nearly as old as FIA, the Futures Industry Association. It was founded in the early 1980s. Actually, I think the origins of it come from about 79. It was founded at a time which is not that different from the one we have today. When futures were innovated, people in continental Europe said, that's some crazy thing the Americans have developed, followed by their poodle friends, the British, who had just developed this roulette wheel of derivatives trading and all this stuff. And basically, there was a job to be done in the early 80s to tell people this is not a roulette wheel, this is a legitimate means by which people hedge. This is something that's very much needed by the market. And if you look at what people are saying today, we have that story coming in from the development community, what's happening with MiFID II, with some of the other regulations where people are saying, some of these trades need to be curbed, some of these things need to be stopped because these speculators are causing a huge amount of problems without remembering what hedgers and others need to do in futures markets. I'm giving you a front office, I know that's an uncool expression now, but I'm giving you a front trader office type perspective. So Swiss Futures and Options Association started in that vein and developed with a bunch of sort of very refined kind of Swiss people who developed this association and developed a fabulous annual conference which was called Bergenstock. And the reason it was called Bergenstock was because it was on the side of a beautiful resort on the side of a mountain in a place called Bergenstock. And basically what happened was they developed this thing and the CEOs used to go and attend this meeting, and because all the CEOs were going, everybody else went, like sheep, This big thing developed, and the CEOs were happy to go there at the time because the exchanges in those days, there were lots of them, and they were clubs, bluntly. They weren't, as they are now, blood-sucking, shareholder-driven, profiteering institutions they are right now. So you could go, take your wife, have a nice time, spend 3 or 4 days there, cogitate on what's going to happen to the market, and then do things. And actually, it was Bergenstock where these exchange guys formulated some of their ideas. And they thought, you know what, we need to consolidate a bit. You know what, we need to go public. We need to have shareholders. You know what, we need to do all these different things to develop the global derivatives markets. And then when they did that, they no longer had a budget to come to Bergenstock. So what happened really was that was the heyday of that conference, and that was the heyday of the Swiss Futures and Options Association. It was a time when people needed to get together in a kind of neutral environment to talk about markets, how markets would be developed. And as a result, the Swiss Futures and Options Association, even though it's called the Swiss Futures and Options Association, became an international association. All of our members are mostly not in Switzerland. They're now banks, exchanges, FCMs, people like that. You can find out on our website who are members of our association. So that's a little bit about its history. And what changed? Well, when all these guys decided that they were going to become much more sort of, I think, customer focused. By the way, it was a good development, despite how it sounded. When they became more customer focused, they basically consolidated. You now have 4 big players at the top of the exchange world. You've got lots more new emerging markets exchanges coming, like, you know, I'm thinking about some of the African exchanges, Southern Africa, in Asia, all over the place. There are emerging exchanges. But there are 4 big players where there were a lot more originally. That meant that, if you like, the global market, if you're looking at exchanges, has become a bit smaller. And where are we going? So I think you're going to see these exchanges gobble up smaller, more successful exchanges, new platforms, new environments. And you've heard about some of those developments during these 2 days. So we're in a period of extreme innovation, extreme change. And guess what? The Swiss Futures and Options Association didn't really embrace that change, if I'm totally blunt. So from about 3 or 4 years ago, we started to complain about the paradigm shift. What we basically had was a management who was saying, we don't want to think different like Apple. We don't really want to change. What we want to do is we want everyone to remember how lovely it was when we were on the side of the mountain with the CEOs coming with their wives for lovely long weekends, and we want to run this thing, and that's how we want it to be. And of course, that's unsustainable. And although I understand that, we needed to do something new. This is where we are. This is the Swiss Futures and Options Association. And this is actually a fantastic association, an international association, which you all know, or you should know about, called the Futures and Industry Association. Now, what we at the Swiss Futures and Options Association are doing is we are innovating. So I took over about a year ago. It's a part-time job for me. I'm not paid for it, so, you know, and I'm not looking in the rear-view mirror. I'm basically saying we need to do some things in order to be to embrace the market, to make some changes, to do things which are going to be interesting. And like all things in the world, like all of us, this is going to sound like a crude remark, you need 2 of everything, right? You don't need just one industry association, you need 2. So what we want to do is we want to kind of look at the things which we think are interesting to the markets, which are going to be important to you as globalized players, and you are in a global marketplace. We want to do those things which we think the market will find interesting. So yesterday somebody said, be nice to legal and compliance because that's what's important, because it pays our salaries. Ouch. I felt like, so, really? No, what pays our salaries is Bitcoin and blockchain and product innovation and new markets and new developments, and that's what we're going to focus on at the Swiss Futures and Options Association. And by the end of next month, we will have changed our name to reflect the fact that we're an international association to the International Commodities and Derivatives Association. I just want you to watch what we're doing, and if you find it interesting and you find the pace of innovation interesting, see the size of these 2 organizations? Just flip back to Apple for me, will you? Yeah, get the drift? So that's it. Thank you very much.